And then please, we really do encourage you to ask questions of our presenters throughout the event. You can drop your questions in the chat, or you can put it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many questions as we can at the end. But you know, if you do have any more, you can please feel free to email me, marmis@foe.org, and we'll try and answer any questions we don't get to. And so to get us started, one of the things I thought would be helpful is, just in case people maybe are not familiar, but to give a little background on manure biogas and sort of why we're even talking about it. And then I'll jump into talking about our case study, which focused on Kewaunee County, Wisconsin. So for those not familiar, manure biogas is produced through anaerobic digestion, and it's done in a digester, which is a closed, oxygen-free environment. It's used to capture the methane released from livestock manure. Bacteria eats at it, breaks it down, and you get left behind a combination of gases, as well as a solid material known as digestate, which very nutrient-rich solid material, as well as leftover liquid known as effluent. A lot of times, biogas is used for heat or electricity. It could be processed and injected into the natural gas pipeline, used as vehicle fuels. And a lot of times you'll hear this framed as renewable natural gas, right? RNG. However, that is complete industry greenwashing, right? Manure biogas is not renewable. It's only renewable if we accept that liquid, wet manure maintained in large lagoons or pits is an unavoidable byproduct of livestock operations. Well, we know it's a choice, right? It's not an immutable characteristic of planet Earth. And so throughout this webinar, you'll hear us refer to it as manure biogas, but also factory farm gas. And the reason we use factory farm gas is, you know, that is a more honest description of it. It better reflects the true nature of this energy. And so they'll be used interchangeably. And as I mentioned, you know, manure biogas, it really does rely on factory farms. Manure biogas, it tends to be only feasible at the largest CAFOs, and really relies and entrenches this system of industrial animal agriculture, because they need that liquid manure and they need a lot of it to be able to produce biogas. And so, you know, part of the other issue with manure biogas production is that it really doesn't address any of the other concerns associated with industrial livestock operations. So environmental concerns and public health harms from these operations on rural communities. It doesn't address anything around farmers locked in unfair contracts or for worker rights. Does nothing to address farmed animal welfare. And then even worse, biogas production actually can create additional environmental and safety concerns for those communities that live closest to CAFOs, including things like increased ammonia emissions. New pipelines often need to be built in order to get that gas to the natural gas pipeline, right? Or sometimes if it's too far away, they have to truck. So wear and tear on the infrastructure of a community. And then I think what's really important to note is that factory farm gas is identical to fossil gas. It burns exactly the same, so that air pollution is exactly the same. And these operations are expensive, and we'll talk a little bit about the incentives and subsidies federal and state governments are providing for manure biogas production, but they're very, very expensive to build, expensive to maintain, and that's really diverting funding away from more constructive, more effective conservation practices. And so why are we even talking about this? Part of the reason that we're talking about this is because, you know, manure biogas production is really being framed as a climate mitigation tool. Lots of money, particularly at the federal level, has been directed towards digesters as well as factory farm gas production. And we're seeing it both on the state level, but also at the federal level. And there's broad bipartisan support for it. However, you know, previous research has shown that it's not actually a particularly effective way to reduce methane emissions, not least of all because it maintains the current polluting system of factory farms. But there's no monitoring, right? Money goes out the door, no monitoring around these operations or the digesters themselves. Research has shown, right, that biogas supply chains leak, so the pipelines leak, the digesters leak, releasing additional methane. Digestion, the process, creates additional greenhouse gases like nitrous oxide. And again, right, we're seeing lots of lucrative incentives and subsidies encouraging the growth of these operations to produce more manure, to produce more methane. But we're also seeing that meaning manure is going to be maintained in the hazardous methane generating manner of lagoons and pits, which is just terrible for any community living closest to these CAFOs. And so that's really why we're talking about it. We are talking about it because we're seeing just a flood of incentives for this type of gas. And we'll talk a little bit more about what those exactly are. But Friends of the Earth and the Socially Responsible Agriculture Project, or SRAP, did a deep dive into a community in Wisconsin, really looking at the growth of anaerobic digesters in their community. And so Kewaunee County is a community east of Green Bay. They have a high concentration of dairy CAFOs in their community. And for those who may not know, Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, or Wisconsin DNR, defines a CAFO as 1,000 animal units or more. That is what a CAFO is. So a lot of cows kept in this one community, which means a lot of manure is kept in this one community. And Kewaunee County has really struggled with chronic water quality issues over the last decade. And again, it's a couple of things, right? Like it's this high concentration of dairy CAFOs. Kewaunee County also has unique topography. They have karst topography. And so that means that their bedrock is shallow and it's broken up, lots of cracks and crevices. And so pollutants can easily flow into their groundwater aquifers. Kewaunee County, a lot of the population, over 50% of the population also relies on private wells for drinking water. So access to clean water, access to safe water is a major, major issue. Unsurprisingly, in Kewaunee County, industrialization of dairy farms has been a major part of this problem. One of the residents we spoke with has been there for over 40 years. And, he said to us, small farms around him, he was watching them get gobbled up by bigger farms, which continued to get bigger. And unsurprisingly, we looked at the agriculture census data over the last 30 years. The number of dairy cows actually increased by 88%, but the number of farms themselves decreased by 82%. So that's a lot of animals confined together in a tight space, producing a ton of manure, directly impacting the community. And previous research, showed that, management of dairy waste in Kewaunee County is a major problem. Again, another one of the guys I spoke with mentioned that outdated and inadequately enforced nutrient management plans, which is supposed to help guide how a livestock operator land applies their manure and fertilizer. That's a major issue. The nutrient management plans are required of CAFOs in Wisconsin in order to have their Wisconsin pollution discharge elimination system permit. So managing how they discharge their wastewater. And they're really seeing a lack of enforcement around that, which is a concern. Testing has shown that pathogens like E. coli and Salmonella and Giardia, all these things found in private water supplies. And again, there's been a lot of, especially over the last decade, community advocacy and organizing trying to get regulatory changes. And there have been some, small steps, for example, limiting during certain times of the year when waste can be applied to karst topography, things like that. But nothing significant, for example, like preventing herd size from growing or preventing new lagoons or new pits to be installed. Things like that would make a big difference. And they haven't really seen meaningful change. And again, enforcement continues to be a major issue. And so, we have this community is struggling with liquid manure and extreme water contamination due to the CAFOs around them. And what they're seeing now is this expansion of anaerobic digesters. So about 28% of the CAFOs, about 5 or 6, have digesters or supplying digesters. Over the last 15 years, they've really seen a lot more increase in the growth of these. All of the operations were already enormous, which again is not surprising, just knowing you need large amounts of waste in order to produce biogas. But when we looked at WPD permit applications, as well as applications to California's low carbon fuel standard, which is a credit trading program we'll talk about in a bit, we looked at those to compare herd sizes. And what we found was herd sizes of the CAFOs with anaerobic digesters in Kewaunee County grew by 58%. That's huge. That is a lot more animals. That is a lot more waste. Again, looking at the WPD's permit applications, as it stands, CAFOs with digesters in Kewaunee County were collectively producing over 304 million gallons of waste. That's so much waste. That's more than 1,000 times the amount of human waste being produced in Kewaunee County in a whole year. And so, this is also, this growth rate is consistent with previous research that FO and SRAP did earlier this year, Biogas or Bull. It's a report that looked at multiple states and dairy CAFOs that are supplying digesters. And again, we found that dairy CAFOs with digesters were more likely to increase their herd sizes relative to statewide populations. And again, right, they want to increase their herd sizes to produce more manure to ensure they can maximize methane production. And you can see these are pretty big jumps over the last decade and a half. And again, although like our findings don't prove like a causal link between digesters and herd sizing, it does support this notion that digesters, in combination with incentives that reward biogas production, which we'll talk about, incentivize increased herd sizes. You can look at like some of the applications for federal dollars to build these digesters, and a lot of their economic viability is relying on these markets that are giving them money for the biogas they produce. This is a great map that SRAP put together just to give an idea of like where the CAFOs are in Kewaunee County, where the CAFOs with digesters are, and how close they are to those already impaired waters, right? And a major concern with the folks that we spoke with is digestate, that byproduct from anaerobic digestion. It's typically land applied as fertilizer, but it is very, very, very concentrated, high concentrations of nitrogen and phosphorus. Phosphorus in particular, right, is already applied in excess on the land in Kewaunee County. And so now we have this digestate that is unregulated, being land applied. And it's a major, major concern. It also tends to be more soluble, so it's much easier to spread into waterways. Again, a major concern for Kewaunee County and other communities that oftentimes look like this, right? That they're already struggling with access to clean water, clean air, and to now have this super, super concentrated byproduct being land applied with little regulation is a huge, huge concern. Another thing that we found, right? Proponents of digesters often claim that this technology will help livestock operators improve their manure management and reduce the risk of runoff by, a lot of times we hear like, and a justification to expand herd sizes by saying, oh, we're going to put in a digester, so it'll be fine. What we found in Kewaunee County was that every single operation that was supplying digesters, not only did they have spills, right? One reported 23 spills over the last 15 years, but they were being cited for improper land application, for violating their nutrient management plans. And yet, they continue to grow. They continue to receive funding for biogas from markets like the Low Carbon Fuel Standard. They receive federal funding to build digesters. And again, speaking with folks in Kewaunee County, one of the things someone said to us was just like, I know farmers who are doing the right thing here, who are not polluting our community, and they're not receiving the same sort of support and funding. And again, so a real frustration with the way that this is playing out. And so, as I mentioned, there are programs on the state and federal level that are funding manure biogas production, factory farm gas production as a climate mitigation tool. And it's support not just for the sale of the gas itself, but the infrastructure. You can receive federal funding to build the digesters. 3 CAFOs actually in Kewaunee County receive federal dollars to install their digesters. Again, there's a strong feeling from local community members that federal dollars could be used for better things, for truly renewable energy, not to reward their chronic polluters. But the 2 things that are really driving this are the federal renewable fuel standard, which mandates that a certain volume of biomass-based fuels are mixed in with traditional fossil based fuels. So this guaranteed market for the biofuel industry, they can receive money for producing credits. And again, factory farm gas is a totally viable option. But even more so is California's low carbon fuel standard. Again, this is a climate program. The intent is to reduce the carbon intensity of transportation fuels in the state. And the California Air Resources Board is the one that sets that carbon intensity standard. And so if you have a low carbon fuel that falls below that intensity standard, you receive credits. If you have fuels that are above that carbon intensity score, you'll see deficits, and transportation fuel providers, they have to show that, right, they can meet that carbon intensity standard by, either acquiring or trading for credits. And manure biogas insanely has this really, really negative carbon intensity score, so it receives a large subsidy. And that's because the California Resources Board gives participating CAFOs, and CAFOs can participate from anywhere in the country, so Wisconsin CAFOs, they get credit for reducing manure methane emissions. But again, they're making the assumption that the only way to manage manure is in these large wet lagoons and pits, which is just not true, right? That's a choice, it's an option. But also they get credit for replacing fossil fuels with higher carbon intensity scores. And so it's really distorting the fuel market and driving the growth of factory farm gas. And every single one of the dairy CAFOs in Kewaunee County that have digesters are either participating in the renewable fuel standard, the low carbon fuel standard, or both, oftentimes in partnerships with biogas energy companies. And so again, right, they're receiving these lucrative things, and it's really pushing them to continue to grow, expand, and rely on this as a new revenue source. And so that's it for me for now. You'll hear from me again, but I want to turn it over to Dick Swanson, who is a Kewaunee County resident that we spoke with as part of this case study. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Dick to just share a little bit about his story, and why he decided to talk with us for our case study.
Well, thank you, Molly. Thanks for everything. You did a really good job, and you covered a lot of ground. I'm telling you. We spoke for almost an hour and a half, and you did hit all the bullet points. A lot of people have asked. I've only lived here about 11 years now, moved here from Colorado. People have asked me over, why did you get involved? Why are you so passionate? It's pretty simple. This is my home. I chose to live here. And I'm the type of guy that, yes, no is pretty simple. I drew a line in the sand, and the line for me was, how and why do the people of my county need lawyers to fight for clean water? Why do we have to hire lawyers to fight for clean water? And that is why I am here. 10 years plus, we're still talking to lawyers about trying to get clean water and stop the polluting. Now, nobody here, nobody that I've talked to, is against farming. They're against what's being done by the farmers. I said before, the animals are doing nothing wrong, Molly. Nothing. It's their owners. They know what they're doing. They know where this manure is going. And we've been trying to fight it for all this time. So Kewaunee is ground zero for this fight. And we're going to continue. We're still testing waters. We're still taking samples. In fact, we're using drones, and we're got satellites from Stanford University taking aerial shots of fields that are being applied with manure. And then they send us to go out and take pictures and verify it. It's getting really dangerous. All right. There's a lot of people who don't like us driving around taking pictures. And all we're doing that for is clean water and clean air. I'm trying to help. And the industry seems to be fighting it, and their lawyers are fighting it even harder. So Kewaunee County is where I've drawn my line. I'm here. We're going to fight. We've got a huge crew. We're not going anywhere. And I've got people calling me. I've got people saying I'm not going to rent my land for manure spreading. Day after day, we hear of a manure spill. We hear of a tanker with some kind of problems. What a lot of people don't know is this. If that tanker truck tips over while it's on a road delivering manure from point A to point B, if that manure, 24 tons, over 6,000 gallons, if it tips over and spills that nutrient onto the highway, it now becomes, and I quote, a hazardous spill event with federal and state protocols for cleanup. It's so dangerous that it's a hazardous duty spill. That's the same stuff that's being applied onto the fields across the street from your farm, your house. How can it be in the truck and be okay? And when it spills, it's not. But that's the way they've manipulated the law. So it goes on. Every day something is happening. Another farm just got fined $235,000 and is in court, and their agronomist is in trouble, and their spreader got in trouble, and that's after the fact. I honestly believe, and I think most people probably listening to this believe, that the farmers in Kewaunee County can fix this problem tomorrow if they wanted to. But Molly, it's about money for them. It's about greed. They're willing to sign on to these federally funded and state programs, getting paid for manure by the cow, and they still have to get more cows, mean more water. More water is needed every day. More water creates more liquid manure. Molly, Kewaunee County isn't making any more land. So where's the shit gonna go? Excuse me. Where is it gonna go? Well, with a little help from gravity, we know where it goes. We have townships in Kewaunee County where some of 42% of the tested wells are bad, unfit. 42%. Others are 38, 32, 34%. These are townships, 32 square miles. Or 6 by 6 is 36, right? 36 square miles. How would you like to live up there? And yet the dumping continues. For 20 years, some of these fields have been dumped on. And where's the testing? Why aren't we testing these fields every year to find out what the phosphorus level is and the nitrate level, instead of only testing once every 4 years? That's a legislative thing. Guess who doesn't want that to happen? The farming community. They don't want land to be taken away from them. They fear land, loss of fields, more than anything else. They'll get all the permits they want for cows. They can get the high capacity well permits. What they do not have is enough land. So land is our weapon. Land is our weapon. Say no.
That's
Say
exactly
no.
right. That is exactly right, right? And again, the digesters themselves produce the digestate, right? So there's still land applied, there's still land applying digestate, there's still land applying manure. Digesters are simply exacerbating an already toxic, I think,
What goes in a
situation.
digester, Molly, comes out of a digester, plus everything else that's put into it, all the substrate that they bring in and can bring in.
Yep.
Digesters were never designed to kill the pathogens. They were designed to create the methane, which we thought was going to be usable in the industry. But now it's so expensive to refine it and truck it and store it. It's a whole nother issue. Okay. In fact, digesters create more ammonia than they take out. It's a
That's right.
dangerous operation.
It is. It is. Well, thank you so much, Dick. I
Thank
really,
you.
really, again, appreciate you for being here and for speaking with us as part of the case study. I'm now going to turn it over to Kim Dupree, and she is going to talk more about Sustain Rural Wisconsin Network and the work that they're doing on the ground across Wisconsin to push back against digesters. Now I'm going to share my screen again. Go ahead, Kim.
All right, thank you, Molly. Just to give you a little brief overview of what Sustained Rural Wisconsin is, it's finding our people statewide, a bunch of grassroots groups that are dealing with these kind of issues in their local communities, and we all get together once or twice a month and we talk and we strategize and we help each other out and we go to each other's hearings and make public comment and do all that kind of stuff to support each other. Our mission is actually to promote responsible agriculture and protect our rural communities and watersheds from pollution and the impacts of industrial agriculture. Our coalition provides a collaborative platform for coordinating grassroots strategies to influence policy decisions at local, regional, state, and national levels. So that's who we are as a group. And that's a lot of the efforts that we put forward. It's about finding each other and helping each other out. So next slide there, Molly. So when it comes to biogas, that's kind of a new push as of the last 5 years. Me personally, I've been involved in about 10 of these biogas proposals in the region here, just right outside the Twin Cities area. I even got pulled into Painesville, Minnesota and Pelham, Tennessee via social media. So it is amazing the connectivity you can get with social media. So once you get the public educated and help them understand what the issues really are, it's amazing the community support that you get. And so 8 out of 10 of these have been, no, thank you. We don't want a biogas digester in our neighborhood. You know, it started for me personally 25 years ago when I was living in Emerald Township, and the new dairy that was being built 1.5 miles from my house was going to put in a digester, one of the first ones in Wisconsin. And so that's how I started learning about digesters, learning about their after effects. After 2 years, the thing exploded. It was basically sidelined, the digester part, but the dairy continued on. And the town hall that was across the road, the well that the town hall had was built in 2007, and the nitrates were at about 7 parts per million at the time. But after many years of the dairy being there and spreading, 2 or 3 of that of digestate spreading, which is highly concentrated, the nitrates now run in about the 40s on a regular basis. Have even peaked at 50 and 60 parts per million. So it's a real public health issue that we need to be on top of. So you can switch to the next slide. So what have we done to basically push back and get to a point where we can start controlling our local communities? So again, this is I've done this about 10 times, and we've done various things depending on the situation. The best thing to do when you're talking to most of the public who have absolutely no clue about what a biogas digester does is our 15 FAQs at nodigester.com, questions to ask. We got these from the folks in Eastern Wisconsin many years ago, and it helps people understand what the issues are and what they need to ask of the digester companies. And then it's just a matter of getting people up to speed on what's going on in their community. Because most people, if you're like me, you're not watching the town board meeting minutes every month, you know. So you need to get folks aware and get it on their radar. And on the right-hand side, we see things that we've learned you should always check for. A comprehensive plan in your township. It might help you get fight back on the biogas digester. What's your local water quality and quantity info? You can get, and Socially Responsible Ag Project and Lynn Henning and Mary Doherty can help you find these types of things if you don't know. The municipal wellhead protection area. Actually, one of the digester companies came into Roberts, Wisconsin and made a proposal in their industrial park, but that part of the industrial park was actually in the wellhead protection program for their entire city drinking water. Bad place to site a manure processing facility. So those are the types of things you learn to watch for. Their violation history. Vanguard had a huge violation history out in Massachusetts and Vermont. And it took some diligent citizens digging that up off of the online to find their violation history. And of course, none of that was ever talked about when they were, pitching their proposals. Your roads, you know, we made reference to those. EMS, I mean, firefighters, they need to have the training to deal with this type of a biogas facility. That's not an ordinary apartment fire. And we also noticed that there's been paid trips to Europe. Either the township or the city paid for people to go over there and take a tour, or actually the company, the biodigester company, took people over there and paid for their trip. And so, of course, they get the dog and pony show that's all very nice and tidy, and they don't talk about how the regulations in Europe are very different than the regulations here in America. So anyways, so we have found that if you educate the public, most of the time, if they have solid facts and info, they will act on it. And in St. Croix County, which is right directly across from Twin Cities, we actually beat back Nature Energy, which was the largest biogas company in Europe, 3 different times in St. Croix County. So it can be done. So don't lose hope. We can get it done. So next slide, please. One of the hurdles you'll have to go when you're talking to the folks is that they figure the DNR or the EPA or somebody in government is watching the store for them. They don't think about it because they don't have to think about it. That's what your tax dollars go for, right? Paying people to watch this. So what I love this chart that Lisa came up with, this operations ordinances, where they talk about what DNR does look at, and it's pretty much just water quality stuff. Water quality, not even water quantity as much. It's water quality. They don't worry about, air pollution. They're not worried about infectious diseases like avian flu. The DNR isn't worried about carcass disposal or biosecurity or your road plans or your water use, your impact on your property values, your fire. DNR doesn't touch any of that stuff with a 10-foot pole. So that's when you really need to take the reins by yourself and start looking at these things in your local community, because you can set things up in your local community with ordinances to watch out and to be able to get these things under control in your community. So next slide. So basically what you're saying is these are operational ordinances. That's how we're setting them up in Wisconsin. They're operational ordinances because this is not a ban on a CAFO. This is not a ban on a digester. We're not allowed to do that. It's not even a siting ordinance or a zoning ordinance because there's a lot of restrictions on that. But what it really is how do they do business day by day? It's an operations ordinance, and that's where you can include all these other things. And townships in Wisconsin actually have the statutory authority to protect public health and safety, water quality, and air quality. And so basically you're telling these operators, well, you can come here, but you're playing by my rules, not yours. And so you're setting up these rules and these ordinances in advance so that they know what to expect, first off. And secondly, they usually don't want to come and play by those rules, so they go elsewhere. That's the benefit of it. All right, next slide. So what Lisa and her folks in Polk and Burnett County did, they took a systems approach to local control. And so on the CAFO side, if this digester is being done at a CAFO, you obviously you have CAFO concerns. But in St. Croix, we were having digesters that weren't done on the farms. They were done regionally in some industrial parks because, quite frankly, they got denied out in the country, so by the county early on. So they were trying to sneak into a city or a village so that they could set up shop. But obviously for the CAFO concerns, there's great operational ordinances that these 6 townships all got together and they all chipped in money, actual money. They paid 3 lawyers and a bunch of experts, came up with these wonderful set of ordinances that dealt with all these CAFO concerns over here on the left-hand side. And 5 townships passed that and 1 rescinded. And so what we're doing in Wisconsin is that we're trying to incorporate now the extra digester concerns into these types of ordinances, just trying to put in verbiage. And so obviously we've heard some of the digester concerns already, concentrated nutrients. We also have heavy metals. PFAS is a big thing if they're bringing in food packaging, from food waste. plastics, again, micro and nanoplastics with basically food packaging. And then, of course, you have all the hydrogen sulfide, sulfur dioxide, VOCs, the air pollution issue with digesters. That's a real concern. And what a lot of folks don't realize is the digesters are sneaking into the co-digestion market. So they're bringing in all this other non-manure and even non-dairy type items, non-farm type items in, and trying to process that so they can just spread it out on the land. And so these are the kinds of things that you need to have your radar up and that we can address through ordinances to help them play by our rules. If they're going to come here, you're going to play by our rules. All right, next slide. All right, the top here talks about, this is a proposal that St. Croix County is doing right now. They're actually going to have their first meeting tomorrow night, start talking about this stuff. But for those digesters that especially are doing the co-digester, that are bringing in outside stuff that's non-farm, technically, according to Wisconsin statute, they shouldn't have more than 10% of non-manure items without having to go through a whole bunch of extra, brouhaha. And so that's the key, is this 10%. Now, a lot of them are trying to get that changed. They want to be able to do 20% non-manure, 50% non-manure, So basically what they're basically doing is taking manure as the substrate and using the loose agricultural laws in order to dispose of other more toxic hazardous waste. And when this really came home to us, when we actually sat down on the bottom half of the slide here, you'll see the comparison on the regulations between farm animal feeding operations, landfills, and wastewater domestic sludge and that kind of stuff. The amount of testing that needs to be done, the amount of oversight that is needed, the amount of recording that is needed is astronomically higher for wastewater and sludge. Because you'll hear this argument out there that, well, you already have digesters in your neighborhood, your wastewater treatment plant. What are you griping about? We already do this. Well, you do, but it's a lot more regulated, and it's a lot more careful oversight, and it's a lot more stringent than putting it in a digester on a farm and then just putting it out on the field. And so that's our concern, is that we don't want those kind of elements in the fields, because even though half the field, corn, basically goes to ethanol in your tank, the other half ends up in our food supply. And you don't want to introduce PFAS and nanoplastics and heavy metals into our food supply. So, next slide. So if you want to peek at the ordinances that are being done up here in Wisconsin, you can go to protectyourtown.org. Those are, like I said, mainly the CAFO ordinances right now, and they're going forward to incorporate more of the digester type of concerns into those. St. Croix, like I said, is just starting theirs as well. And so we have a lot of interest statewide, and I'm sure around the country, as to how the wording of these is going to be. And we'll be more than happy to share them with all of you when they're completed. So I'll turn it back over to Molly and see if there's questions.
Thank you, Kim. Really appreciate that. So I'm now going to just kind of talk about some of our policy recommendations, including some of the feedback that we got from the Kewaunee County residents we spoke with. And then we'll have time for plenty of questions. And so, again, one of the biggest pieces of feedback that we got was a desire for stronger enforcement of environmental protection laws, right? The state and the federal government have the ability to protect water, to protect the land. And that's really what people who are living closest to CAFOs, who are living closest to these biogas facilities want to see. They want to see more support for sustainable, regenerative agriculture, putting animals back on land, and they want to see support for truly renewable energy. And so really, we recommend, resources that are supporting manure biogas should be redirected to more cost-effective methane reduction solutions that are not going to exacerbate environmental injustice, that are not going to exacerbate harm to rural communities, that are not going to exacerbate industry consolidation, which are all things that we're seeing with the proliferation of anaerobic digesters and factory farm gas production. We have some additional policy recommendations, and again, these are a lot of things that the state of Wisconsin could do right now. You know, to Dick's point, changes could happen right now, right? Things like regulating the waste that's coming from CAFOs, regulating the digestate, you know, really incentivizing better agricultural processes and practices. But also, right, I think one of the biggest gaps is like actually tracking methane emissions and properly regulating them like we would any other sector. Overall, just the status quo is no longer acceptable, and manure biogas production really does maintain that. And so there's a strong desire to see a difference. And so how can you help? I want to end on like a positive note. I think Kim did a really good job of identifying things to look out for, but there are some things that you can do today. Reaching out to your federal representatives to support, you know, federal legislation like the Farm Systems Reform Act, which would help, you know, CAFO operators transition to, you know, more livestock, or sorry, more pasture-based livestock production, right? Holding polluters accountable. Another bill, the EQIP Improvement Act, would really be about prioritizing using conservation dollars for small, sustainable farmers, ensuring that, you know, large portions of the money are not just going to these really big industrial livestock operators. Another thing to keep an eye out for are bills in Wisconsin that are trying to create incentives for factory farm gas, like the low carbon fuel standard, which again, it's framed as a climate mitigation tool, but as you know, we discussed, it really perverts the intent of the law, and is really prioritizing factory farm gas to the detriment of the communities closest to these operations. Another thing, this is something Lisa and Kim pointed out, and I think is really important, which is register to vote. You know, really pay attention to the people running for office on the local level, on the state level. They're making a lot of decisions. I think Kim brought up a lot of good points about, you know, what is happening and where it's happening, right? The building of these CAFOs and the building of these digesters in Wisconsin, this is happening at the local level. And these are the people you want to know, you know, who's in office and what do they think about these things. And so making sure you're registered to vote, making sure you're aware of who's running in your community is something that's really, really important and something that everybody can do, which is really, really great. And so now I just want to open it up for questions. I know we had a couple in the Q&A. And so Kim, I was hoping, you know, there's one question that talked about, you know, how can we talk to neighbors about, you know, the field spreading on CAFOs, but I was hoping you could talk just a little bit about sort of building off of that. Like, have you had successful conversations on the local level with like livestock operators, or, you know, how do local legislators respond to these issues that you guys are bringing up? How, you know, has it been successful in terms of engaging with local policymakers on this issue?
I think we've had some success and not so much in other areas, you know, so it really depends on that person and their personal experience, I think. And you know, I approach this as a farmer's daughter, and I'm also a master gardener. So I have a little bit of knowledge of what really goes on, you know, in the field. And so I think that helps, gives a little bit of credibility, and just trying to build that relationship with those people. You know, just don't drop in whenever you're mad about something. Try to build a little bit of a relationship with them and get to know them as a person. If you don't already, maybe you do already. And try to build that a little bit of trust so that when you bring concerns forward, hey, I have questions about how this is being handled, you know. And I mean, I know our original owner at Emerald Dairy was pretty responsive to the neighborhood if they came to him with something. Now, I don't know that he always handled it appropriately, but anyway, he was fairly responsive. But again, it's about having a good relationship with those local people so that you can, you know, have an effect on them when you bring a concern forward.
That's great.
Yeah, I think I could answer that too, very specifically. What you have a situation is these large factories, they just grab a plat book and write names down on their nutrient management plan of where they're going to spread the waste. So what we did is we called the landowners. We've done this in several different places, called the landowners and said, did you know that that you are in a nutrient management plan? And a lot of times they don't have no idea that they're in the plan or that they're part of the plan. So, you know, pick up the phone and call them. It really does work. And we were able to shut down a hog factory with 20,000 hogs because they really didn't control the land they claimed. They're not required to have agreements with the landowners. The DNR may require them, but they're not required to have them. So we have actually shut down a hog operation in Burnett County by calling people and asking them.
Yeah,
To not
back,
even know.
yeah, back to Dick's point, they have to have land. If they don't have land, game over.
You know, we've had several different people talk about land and taking it away. And I understand the math. You know, I understand how this money is being used by the farmers that, you know, may not be farming anymore. They're just cropping. I don't know if we can really win that battle, Kim, taking away the land. The money is so important to those people.
Mhm.
But if they really did the math on what their 80 acres is worth with water and 80 acres without water and a history of poisoning, I think they would stop renting tomorrow.
Mhm.
But they don't do the math, unfortunately.
Mhm.
We're trying.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that was really helpful from all of you. Again, I think that there's like, you know, sometimes things just start to happen, especially in a local community that you don't always realize are happening, right? And so I think Kim's Dick's point about just paying attention to what's going on in your community, building relationships, not just with your policymakers, but the other, you know, landowners in your community can be really, really helpful to ensure that, you know, things are done right. Another question was, how do we shift the manure management costs from local farmer to big ag? And, you know, I think that's a really good question. Again, the Farm System Reform Act is a good piece of legislation for that reason, because it's really holding accountable, you know, not the individual farmer, but those large agribusiness entities that these producers often have contracts with, right? So holding them accountable for the pollution that's happening, not externalizing it on the community. I also think, right, one of the things we spoke about with the folks in Kewaunee County, you know, some of the residents we spoke with, really about incentivizing better forms of agriculture, moving away from this industrial model and paying people to do that, I think would go a long way. Kim, I don't know, Lisa, Dick, if you guys have any other thoughts on sort of like shifting, you know, this manure management cost from local farmer to big ag, but those are kind of off the top of my head.
Yeah, I guess the only other thought I have is that if you have questions, or your extension ag agent might be a good person to reach out to as well, if you wanted a more neutral person in a sense, hopefully.
And can you just, and Kim, just explain what a extension.
University, the land grant universities always have extension programs, and their ag agents can sometimes answer questions like, who can I rent my land to if I don't want to rent it to the CAFO? You know, maybe they have contacts in the community or know what's going on. Or other questions you have about process. Or Wisconsin Farmers Union has been a great partner in Wisconsin, you know, to get some of those questions answered. And so reaching out to folks like that, their chapter presidents, can be helpful at times as well.
One of the questions was asking if Wisconsin has a statewide version of the Farm System Reform Act. I don't think so, but Kim and Lisa, is there has there been any legislation that you're aware of on the state or the local level on the state level, that might be good? If there's anything bad, Dick, same question for you. If you guys have heard about any legislation on the state level that might be positive or negative, around this issue.
Well, we had an attempt in the legislative session this year. It was Assembly Bill 957, which was the Wisconsin Farm Bureau trying to ban local ordinances. After telling us for 5 years that they were already legal, then they got a piece of legislation together to ban them. They say they're gonna come back again, but we actually organized and got almost 1,000 people to ask Governor Evers for a veto. And that piece of legislation did get through both the House and the Senate, but the governor vetoed it. So I don't know of any good legislation. I think I'm not trying to be partisan, but the Democrats don't have anything going on this CAFO deal, and the Republicans are extremely supportive of the industry. In fact, you know, the Democrats at the federal level are the ones who are funding, you know, these methane biogas places. So, but maybe Dick knows something I don't know.
Well, thank you, Mary. We had a little luck when the citizens of Kewaunee County created enough noise that the DNR opened up NR 151 for review. This is one of the rules that governs farming, okay? Natural resource 151. There is another ordinance, 590, which is, I believe, under review now. There's discussions about it being done. But there is the big one, NR 243, which governs CAFOs. Now, 5 years ago, when we started, well, more than that now, I'm sorry about the time, we were told that there's a possibility that 243 would open up and we could start reviewing that. That is not happening. It doesn't sound like the Dairy Business Association or their lawyers will let this happen. And that's the ordinance, NR 243, that the state needs to update. Bringing in stiffer requirements, bigger setbacks, you know, more inspections. Why should a field only be checked once every 4 years for its mineral content, nitrate and phosphorus? It should be tested every year to whether it can stay in the plan or not be in the plan. I mean, there's common sense, but that doesn't always work in Wisconsin.
And if it makes you feel better, I think people from across the country have similar feelings around this, unfortunately. Kim and Lisa, one of the questions, I apologize, I forgot this was one of the earlier questions, but you know, if a CAFO is prevented from coming in one area, have you seen it kind of hop to another area? Or have you seen that, you know, certain operations are willing to kind of adjust to the local ordinance rules, and willing to kind of put up with it?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head, Lisa.
Well, yeah, very much so. There's a big hog operator in Iowa, Reeks View Farm, and they tried to build a sow factory right overlooking Lake Superior in Bayfield County, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
In 2016. And that's one of the things they're trying to do is move the sows out of the production areas because the viral load's so bad. Bayfield passed an ordinance, and that same operation showed up in Polk and Burnett County. Same guy, Jeff Sauer. We knew him, and actually that helped us a lot. So yeah, they do. It can be whack-a-mole. But for me, local work is where it's at. You know, the state level work is not that great. You can do a lot more at the local level. That's what we're doing.
Right. And again, I think that makes sense because, you know, the folks there are they're just closer to the issue. So they sort of understand and they can see it. I think as we get higher and higher, right, it's like further removed, it's harder to necessarily understand the implications of policies and legislation, right? Which is tough.
Yeah, and at the local level, you don't get into the partisan thing so much. Like with our work, we have a broad spectrum of, you know, MAGA supporting Republicans and back to the lander, you know, far left-wing people. I mean, they all understand that that's going to be their water. So it's much easier to work locally on that level.
Go ahead, Dick.
Yeah, Molly, I was about to say that after after traveling around the state as Kim does, and we all do, and we talk at local levels, we talk at town hall meetings, county meetings, we've spoken at the DNR, we've gone to Natural Resources Board, we've done everything. And we have told this story for so long that I sometimes simplify it by saying the citizens at a local level are going to get very, very little help from the EPA. It takes too long. They're too big. They're going to get little help, but some help from the DNR, somewhat more local. But when it comes to asking your local elected officials to man up and do what needs to be done, they do not have the stones for this fight. They do not and will not do it. That's what we find in Kewaunee County. Now, if your county has a different board, you're lucky. But ours, 90% is farm related, and their families work in it, their relatives work in it, in the industry. And when you go to these meetings and they have these great presentations, what we see is speaker after speaker after speaker is standing up there in their golf shirt with a logo on it. They're selling something. They're selling the idea and a commission check. And that's wrong. That water down there belongs to me and you, the people of Wisconsin. It's our water. Stop polluting it. You have a choice. Do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dick. No, thank you. I think that that's a really great note to end on. I apologize. We definitely did not get to every question, but that's a great note to end on, and to remind everyone, make sure you're registered to vote. Make sure you know who's representing you. And so I want to thank our speakers. I want to thank Lisa. I want to thank Kim. I want to thank Dick. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. Thank everyone on this call who attended. I hope it was informative. Again, this week you'll receive, an email from me with a link to the recording of this presentation, as well as some resources, including a copy of the slides on how you can support, policies that really do prioritize the environment and family farmers and a cleaner climate. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day, and thank you again for joining us.
Molly, thank you. Thank you all. Thanks, Kim. Thanks.